He found shelter in a forgotten Cold War bunker to escape a blizzard. But what Marcus discovered, sealed behind reinforced steel in the deepest chamber, wasn't just survival. It was $295 million the government forgot existed, and a chance to finally repay a debt a nation owed to those it left behind. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind came down from the Rockies like a living thing, cold and merciless, carrying snow that stung like broken glass. Marcus Reed sat in his rusted Ford Ranger on the shoulder of Highway 43, watching the temperature gauge drop while his breath fogged the cracked windshield. 62 years old, weathered like the Montana landscape around him, with hands that still knew how to fix things even when his mind couldn't fix itself. The radio crackled with emergency warnings. Unprecedented winter storm. Travel not advised. Seek shelter immediately. Marcus laughed once, sharp and bitter. Seek shelter. As if he had anywhere to go. His trailer sat 15 miles south in Copper Ridge, a town so small it barely registered on maps anymore. Population 347, according to the faded sign at the town limits. 348 if you counted old Mrs. Henderson's cat that basically ran the post office. The trailer was a single wide with heating that worked when it felt like it, and walls so thin he could hear his neighbor's television through 2 layers of aluminum siding. But it was home, or at least it was the place he slept. The truck had died 20 minutes ago, just quit on him like everything else in his life eventually did. Marcus had tried the ignition 6 times, pumped the gas, checked under the hood in the driving snow. Nothing. The engine was cold and silent, and the storm was getting worse. He pulled his coat tighter, a surplus military jacket he'd had since 1991, frayed at the cuffs and missing 2 buttons. His dog tags hung beneath his thermal shirt, cold metal against older scars. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed, United States Army demolitions expert, Gulf War veteran. The tags were the only thing that proved he'd once mattered to someone, even if that someone was Uncle Sam, and even Uncle Sam had mostly forgotten about him now. The VA check came every month, $1,142. It covered rent on the trailer, some food, and not much else. He'd applied for disability 3 times. Denied, pending. The pending had been pending for 4 years now. Marcus had learned not to expect much. He grabbed his backpack from the passenger seat, the one he'd carried overseas, still olive drab and holding together by sheer stubbornness. Inside was a flashlight, some beef jerky, a water bottle, and a folding knife. Not much for surviving a blizzard, but Marcus had survived worse with less. He stepped out into the storm and the wind hit him like a fist. Snow swirled in violent gusts, turning the world into a white void. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. The highway disappeared behind him within seconds, swallowed by the blizzard. Marcus knew this area, though, had trained out here in '89, back when Fort Harrison still ran winter survival courses. Miles of nothing but mountains, pine forests, and ghosts of the Cold War. There used to be installations out here, monitoring stations and communication bunkers scattered across the wilderness like forgotten chess pieces from a game that ended decades ago. He oriented himself by memory and instinct, turned east, and started walking. The cold bit through his jacket within minutes. His fingers went numb even inside his gloves. His breath came in short, visible bursts that the wind tore away. Each step was a negotiation with the snow, which had already piled knee-deep in places. Marcus had been cold before. In the desert, nights got cold enough to freeze water in your canteen. He'd learned to compartmentalize discomfort, to put it in a box in his mind and keep moving. That skill had kept him alive overseas. It would keep him alive now. He thought about Danny. Danny Cooper, his squad mate, best friend. The guy who used to make everyone laugh even when they were cleaning latrines or pulling night watch in the middle of nowhere. Danny had stepped on an IED outside Basra in 2003 during a return deployment Marcus hadn't been on. Marcus had been stateside by then, discharged, already struggling with the memories and the nightmares and the way loud noises made his heart race. Danny's wife had called him. Marcus hadn't known what to say, still didn't. He pushed through a stand of pines, their branches heavy with snow and ice. His legs burned, his lungs burned. But he kept moving because stopping meant dying, and Marcus wasn't ready for that yet, even on the days when living felt like the harder choice. Then he saw it. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the storm. But as he got closer, he recognized the shape. A small concrete structure barely visible beneath decades of overgrowth and accumulated debris. Only the top 3 feet were exposed, but Marcus knew what he was looking at. A ventilation shaft. Military grade. Cold War era. His heart rate picked up, not from fear, but from recognition. He'd seen structures like this before during training. These shafts connected to underground installations, bunkers built during the height of nuclear paranoia when the government prepared for the end of the world. Marcus circled the structure, brushing away snow with his gloved hands. There had to be an entrance. These bunkers always had access points, usually disguised or hidden, but there. He found it 15 feet away, a blast door set into the hillside, camouflaged with artificial rock facing that had deteriorated over the years. The door was maybe 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, reinforced steel beneath the facade. A placard on the door was barely legible, corroded by decades of weather. United States government property, authorized personnel only. Trespassing prohibited under penalty of federal law. Marcus almost laughed. Prohibited. Like anyone remembered this place existed. He ran his hands along the doorframe, looking for the release mechanism. These old bunkers had manual overrides required by safety regulations in case of power failure or emergency. His fingers found a recessed panel on the right side, frozen shut. He pulled out his knife and chipped away ice until he could pry the panel open. Inside was a wheel lock, the kind you'd see on a ship's hatch. Marcus gripped it with both hands and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, putting his full weight into it. The metal groaned but didn't turn. Rust and time had sealed it. Marcus stepped back, thinking. His demolitions training kicked in, not the explosive part, but the mechanical understanding. Pressure points, leverage, structural weak spots. He searched the ground and found a thick branch that hadn't completely rotted. He wedged it through the wheel's spokes and used it as a lever. The wheel shrieked in protest. Marcus threw his full body weight against the branch. Something inside the mechanism snapped, and suddenly the wheel was turning, grinding against itself, fighting every inch. After 5 full rotations, something inside the door clicked. The seal broke with a hiss of escaping air, stale and dry like opening a tomb. Marcus pulled the door open. It was heavy, maybe 300 pounds of solid steel, but it swung on counterweights designed to make it manageable. Beyond the door was darkness and a set of metal stairs leading down. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating grey concrete walls and steel handrails. The stairs descended at a steep angle, disappearing into shadow. Marcus looked back at the storm. Snow was already beginning to fill his footprints. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in the last hour. He could maybe last another 30 minutes out here before hypothermia set in. He stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind him. The silence was immediate and absolute. The howl of the wind cut off like someone had thrown a switch. Marcus stood on the landing, breathing hard, watching his breath fog in the beam of his flashlight. The air was cold but not freezing, warmer than outside. He descended the stairs carefully. They were metal grating, his boots ringing with each step. Down 20 steps, then a landing, then 20 more. The walls were solid concrete, sweating with condensation. Pipes ran along the ceiling, painted in faded colors that once meant something to someone. At the bottom was another door, this one not sealed. It opened easily. Marcus stepped into what looked like a command center from a movie set in 1962. The room was maybe 40 feet across, filled with old equipment, metal desks bolted to the floor, ancient computer terminals with screens like porthole windows, radio equipment with dials and switches, filing cabinets, corkboards still holding yellowed papers and maps, and lights. Incredibly, there were lights. Low emergency lighting running on some kind of backup power, casting everything in a dim amber glow. Marcus swept his flashlight around the room slowly. Dust covered everything, but there were no signs of collapse, no water damage, no animal intrusion. The bunker had been sealed tight enough to preserve itself. On one wall hung a large map of the United States with Soviet targets marked in red. Another wall had a duty roster from August 1987, names of personnel who had once worked here. He recognized the setup now. This was a continuity of government facility, one of dozens built during the Cold War to house command staff and coordinate response in case of nuclear attack. When the Soviet Union fell, most of these places had been decommissioned, stripped, and sealed. But clearly, someone had forgotten about this one. Marcus set his pack down and explored further. Through a doorway was a corridor lined with doors. He opened them one by one. Sleeping quarters with bunk beds, thin mattresses still in place. A bathroom with industrial toilets and sinks still had water when he turned a tap, cold and metallic tasting but clear. A kitchen area with industrial equipment and storage. He opened a pantry, shelves stocked with military rations in vacuum-sealed packages. He checked dates. Most expired in the early 90s, but some were from 2001, 2004. Someone had restocked this place, at least partially, long after it should have been abandoned. That was strange. In the main room, Marcus found a logbook on one of the desks. He opened it carefully. The entries were sporadic, most from the 80s, routine checks and maintenance notes. Then a gap. Then a few entries from 2003. The handwriting was different, rushed. One entry caught his eye. November 7, 2003. Final inspection complete. Project Safeguard assets secured. Installation to be sealed permanently. Recommend Level 7 clearance for any future access. Signed, but the signature was illegible. Project Safeguard. Marcus had never heard of it. He kept reading. The last entry was dated November 15, 2003. All packages stored in Vault B. Manifest filed under classified protocols. God help whoever finds this if we never come back. Vault B. Marcus looked around the main room. He saw Vault A marked on a door near the back, probably storage, but no Vault B. He spent the next hour searching. Checked every room, every corridor, every door. The bunker wasn't huge, maybe 5,000 square feet total, but it was a maze of Cold War paranoia and redundant systems. Finally, in what looked like a communication room filled with dead radio equipment, he noticed something off. The back wall didn't match. The concrete was smoother, newer. He ran his hand along it and found a seam, barely visible, painted over, but there. A hidden door. Marcus stepped closer. Unlike the other doors in the bunker, this one had no obvious handle or mechanism, just a small keypad set into the wall beside it, the kind that required a code. The display was dark. He pressed a button. Nothing. No power to the keypad. He examined the doorframe more carefully. His demolitions training helped him see the structure. This wasn't just a door, it was a vault door, reinforced and sealed, designed to protect something. Marcus found the power junction for the communication room and traced the wiring. Most of the bunker ran on backup generators that must have kicked in when he opened the outer door. But this section had been deliberately disconnected. He followed the wire to a breaker panel in the corridor. Someone had pulled the breaker and put a lock through the switch. Marcus used his knife to pry the lock off, then flipped the breaker. A hum started deep in the walls. Lights flickered on in the communication room, brighter than the emergency lighting. The keypad beside the hidden door glowed green. Enter authorization code. Marcus stared at it. He had no code, no authorization. But he did have experience with military security systems, and he knew that bunkers like this always had override protocols, engineers' codes that maintenance staff used. He tried the standard ones he remembered from his service. 0001, 1234, 9999. Nothing. Then he noticed something. Scratched into the concrete beside the keypad, barely visible, were 4 numbers. 2718. Someone had left a message. Maybe a maintenance worker who thought they'd be back. Maybe someone who wanted to make sure access was possible. Marcus entered the code. The keypad beeped. The screen flashed. Authorized. Welcome, engineering personnel. Something inside the wall clicked, heavy bolts retracting. The door swung inward an inch. Marcus pulled it open. Cold air rushed out, colder than the rest of the bunker. Climate controlled, preserved. His flashlight beam penetrated the darkness beyond, and what he saw made him freeze. Rows of storage containers, metal cases stacked on industrial shelving that stretched back into a chamber larger than he'd expected. Everything was organized, labeled, pristine. Marcus stepped inside. Motion sensors detected him and lights began clicking on in sequence, illuminating the space row by row. The chamber was massive, 50 feet deep, 30 feet wide, filled with identical metal containers. Each container was labeled with letters and numbers, Federal Reserve markings, Treasury Department seals. His hands were shaking now, not from cold, but from something else. Understanding. Disbelief. He approached the nearest container and found it wasn't locked, just sealed with clips. He opened it. Stacks of cash, bills in perfect condition, still wrapped in Federal Reserve bands, hundreds, 50s, 20s, bundles and bundles of them. Marcus closed that container and opened another. Gold bars. Small ones, maybe £1 each, stamped with United States Treasury markings and dates from the early 60s. Another container. Bearer bonds in protective sleeves, negotiable instruments, untraceable, still valid if the documentation was right. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the concrete floor, flashlight rolling away, heart pounding so hard he thought he might be having a heart attack. This wasn't just some forgotten supplies. This was a fortune, a cache. An emergency fund stored here during the Cold War, meant to rebuild the government after nuclear war, to pay operatives, to fund survival, and everyone had forgotten it existed. Marcus crawled to the nearest container and pulled out a manifest sheet protected in plastic. His eyes could barely focus on the words. Project Safeguard Emergency Continuity Assets. Established October 1963 post-Cuban Missile Crisis. Total asset value as of final audit March 2003, $295 million. His vision blurred. The number was impossible, absurd. $295 million, sitting in a forgotten bunker in Montana, while he'd been struggling to pay for ramen noodles and gas for a truck that didn't run, while Danny's widow had to sell their house because the survivor benefits weren't enough, while Tyler, the kid from Afghanistan he'd met at the VA, had been sleeping in his car because he couldn't afford rent and couldn't hold down a job with his PTSD. While thousands of veterans just like him begged for help from a government that processed their claims at the speed of bureaucracy and denied them more often than not. $295 million. Forgotten. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. His breathing came fast and shallow. Rage and grief and something else, something that felt like vindication, flooded through him. The government that had sent him to war, that had promised to take care of him, that had given him $1,142 a month and told him to be grateful, had forgotten about $295 million. He stood up slowly, walked between the rows of containers, opened more of them. Cash, gold, platinum, bearer bonds, rare coins in protective cases, cut diamonds in velvet bags, every kind of portable wealth that could survive decades in storage. All of it just sitting here, waiting. The storm outside was still raging. Marcus could feel it, a distant rumble through the concrete. He'd be stuck here at least until morning, maybe longer. He walked back to the main chamber and sat at one of the old desks. Found a yellowed notepad and a pen that surprisingly still worked. For hours he just sat there, thinking. He thought about his service, the friends he'd lost, the promises made in recruitment offices about honor and country and taking care of warriors. The reality of coming home to a nation that thanked you for your service and then looked away when you needed help. He thought about the trailer park in Copper Ridge, the other veterans living there, Jim with the missing leg who couldn't get his prosthetic adjusted properly because the VA kept rescheduling, Maria who drove 2 hours each way to get her therapy appointments because the local clinic closed, Robert who'd killed himself last winter, frozen to death in his truck because he'd given up fighting. He thought about what $295 million could do. The sky outside was beginning to lighten when Marcus finally moved. He stood, walked back into Vault B, and stood in front of the containers. His whole life he'd followed rules, enlisted because it was the right thing to do, served honorably, came home and tried to make it work through legitimate channels, applied for help through proper forms, waited his turn, did everything right, and the system had chewed him up and spit him out and forgotten he existed, just like it had forgotten about this bunker and everything inside it. Marcus reached into the nearest container and pulled out a single gold bar. It was heavy in his hand, maybe 15 ounces, worth somewhere around $30,000 at current prices, if he remembered right. He stared at it for a long time. Then he put it in his backpack. The storm had passed by midday, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Marcus sealed the vault, powered down the keypad, and made his way back through the bunker to the entrance. He climbed the stairs and pushed open the outer door. Sunlight blinded him. The air was crystal clear and cold enough to hurt. His truck was completely buried, just a mound in the snow. It would take hours to dig it out, and it still wouldn't run. But Marcus wasn't the same man who'd walked into that bunker yesterday. He hiked the 15 miles back to Copper Ridge. It took him 6 hours, breaking trail through snow that came up to his thighs in places. By the time he reached his trailer, the sun was setting again, painting the snow gold and pink. His neighbor Jim was outside with a shovel, clearing a path to his truck. "Marcus Jesus, we thought you were dead," Jim called out. "Storm caught you?" "Found shelter," Marcus said. "I'm okay." Jim looked him over. "You look different. Something happened." Marcus thought about the gold bar in his backpack, about Vault B, about $295 million sitting in the dark. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Something happened." That night, Marcus sat at his tiny kitchen table with the gold bar in front of him. He'd looked it up online using his phone. 15.2 ounces. Current gold price, $1,893 per ounce. The bar was worth just under $29,000. More money than he'd seen in a decade, and he had access to $295 million more. His hands shook as he picked up the bar again. The weight of it wasn't just the gold. It was choice, possibility, power. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Reed had options, and the government that had forgotten both him and this fortune would never know the difference. He set the bar down and stared at it until morning came. Marcus didn't sleep that first night. He sat at his kitchen table turning the gold bar over in his hands, watching the way it caught the weak light from his single overhead bulb. The metal was cold and dense, stamped with United States Treasury markings and a date, 1964. It had been sitting in that bunker for nearly 60 years while the world above forgot it existed. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He needed to go back. The official story would be simple. His truck had died in the storm, and he'd sheltered in place until it passed. He'd tell Jim and the others at the trailer park that a buddy from Copper Ridge had towed him out. People around here didn't ask too many questions anyway. Everyone had their own struggles. Marcus waited 3 days. Let the roads clear. Let the town settle back into its rhythm. He spent those days researching on his phone, using the library's Wi-Fi so nobody could trace it back to his trailer. How to sell gold without raising flags. Bearer bonds and whether they were still valid. Anonymous transactions, estate liquidation, offshore accounts. The research made his head hurt, but it also gave him a framework, a plan. On the 4th day, he borrowed Jim's truck, told him he needed to check on his broken-down Ford, and drove back out to Highway 43. The bunker entrance was exactly as he'd left it, buried under snow and time. Marcus parked a quarter-mile away and hiked in, carrying a better flashlight this time, a notebook, and 2 empty duffel bags he'd picked up at the Army surplus store in Helena. He opened the bunker door and descended into the silence. The emergency lights were still on, casting that amber glow over everything. Marcus moved through the main chamber quickly now, past the old equipment and sleeping quarters, straight to the communication room. He flipped the breaker, entered the code 2718, and pulled open the vault door. The climate-controlled air washed over him again. The motion sensors triggered and the lights came on in sequence, revealing the rows of containers just as he'd left them. Marcus stood there for a moment, half expecting it to be gone, to have been a hypothermia-induced hallucination. But it was real. All of it. He walked to the manifest he'd found before and studied it more carefully this time. The document was detailed, clinical. 50 million in currency, various denominations, 100 million in gold bullion, small bar format for portability. 100 million in bearer bonds, maturity dates ranging from 2010 to 2040. 45 million in additional portable assets, including platinum, rare coins, cut diamonds, and other negotiable instruments. Total, $295 million. Marcus did the math in his head. If he took 1 gold bar a month, it would take him over 400 years to empty this place. If he lived to be 100, he could take $10,000 a day and still not make a dent. The scale was incomprehensible. He opened his notebook and started cataloging. Container Alpha 1 through Alpha 20 contained currency. Container Beta 1 through Beta 35 contained gold. Container Charlie 1 through Charlie 25 contained bearer bonds. The rest were labeled Delta through Foxtrot, various assets. Marcus worked methodically, opening containers, documenting contents, taking photos with his phone. He worked for 6 hours straight, only stopping when his hands cramped and his eyes blurred from the fluorescent lights. By the end, he had a complete inventory. The manifest had been accurate. If anything, it had been conservative. The 2003 assessment had valued the gold at approximately $350 per ounce. Current prices were over $1,800. That alone meant the real value was closer to $500 million. $500 million. Sitting in a hole in Montana, Marcus sat down on the floor, back against a container marked Delta 7. His mind was racing, trying to process the implications. This wasn't just money. This was power, influence, the ability to change lives on a massive scale, or the ability to destroy his own. He thought about Robert, the vet who'd frozen to death in his truck last winter. Robert had been 51, a Marine who'd served in Desert Storm, came back with traumatic brain injury and PTSD. The VA had denied his disability claims 6 times, said his symptoms weren't service-connected, despite the fact that he'd been knocked unconscious by an explosion in Kuwait. Robert had worked when he could, did odd jobs, lived in his truck when he couldn't make rent. Marcus had found him that February morning, frost covering the windows, Robert's face peaceful like he'd just fallen asleep, except he'd never woken up. $10,000 would have saved Robert's life. A warm apartment, proper medical care, time to heal. $10,000 out of $500 million. The math was obscene. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the calculator app. If he took just 1% of what was here, $5 million, he could change hundreds of lives. Thousands, if he was smart about it. But that would require taking it, stealing it technically. This was government property, classified, forgotten, but still federal assets. What he was contemplating was theft on a scale that would make headlines. Bring federal investigators. Destroy him. Unless nobody ever knew. Marcus stood and walked to container Charlie 1. Bearer bonds. He'd researched these extensively over the last 3 days. They were negotiable instruments, payable to whoever held them, no names attached. Issued before electronic banking made everything traceable. The government had stopped issuing them in 1982 because they were too easy to use for money laundering and tax evasion. But the ones issued before that were still valid, still cashable, still completely anonymous. He opened the container and pulled out a protective sleeve. Inside was a bond certificate, ornate and official, issued in 1976. Face value $100,000, maturity date 2016. It had matured almost 10 years ago, which meant it could be redeemed for full value plus decades of accrued interest. Marcus's hands trembled as he held it. This single piece of paper, if it was legitimate, was worth close to $200,000 now, and there were hundreds of them in this container alone. He carefully placed it back and pulled out another, then another. He checked serial numbers against the manifest. Everything matched. The documentation was meticulous. Whoever had set up Project Safeguard had done it right. Marcus made a decision. He took 5 bearer bonds from 5 different containers, spreading out the selection so no single container would show obvious depletion. Total face value, $500,000. Current value with interest, close to $1 million. He placed them carefully in a waterproof folder he'd brought, then put the folder in his backpack. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Then he went to the gold. Opened container Beta 7 and removed 2 bars. $60,000 worth, give or take. Small enough to transport easily, valuable enough to make a difference. He added them to his pack. Finally, he opened a diamond container, pulled out a single velvet bag containing 3 stones. The documentation said 2 carats each, investment grade, worth maybe $30,000 total on the legitimate market. The pack was heavier now. Marcus zipped it closed and stood there in the vault, breathing hard, sweating despite the cool air. He'd just stolen over $1 million from the United States government. Except they didn't know it existed to begin with. Marcus forced himself to think clearly. He resealed every container he'd opened, making sure everything looked untouched. He checked the manifest, made sure his selections wouldn't be obvious if someone did a visual inspection. Then he took photos of everything with his phone, wide shots showing the vault exactly as it was. Insurance. Evidence. Proof he'd been careful. He left the vault, sealed the door, entered the code to lock it, powered down the breaker, walked back through the bunker, checking each room to make sure he hadn't left any trace of his presence. At the entrance, he stopped, looked back into the amber-lit darkness. This place had saved his life during the storm. Now it might save it in a different way. Or it might destroy everything. Marcus climbed the stairs and emerged into cold sunlight. He sealed the outer door carefully, brushed snow over his tracks, and hiked back to Jim's truck. The drive back to Copper Ridge took 40 minutes. Every mile, Marcus expected sirens, flashing lights, federal agents appearing out of nowhere to arrest him. But the highway was empty, just him and the mountains and a backpack full of stolen fortune. He returned Jim's truck, thanked him, and went back to his trailer, locked the door, pulled the blinds, sat down at the kitchen table and emptied his backpack. 5 bearer bonds, 2 gold bars, 3 diamonds, over $1 million in assets, sitting on his scratched Formica table, next to an empty coffee mug and a past-due electric bill. Marcus picked up his phone and made a call. The number belonged to Frank Morrison, a lawyer in Helena he'd met at the VA. Frank was 73, a Korean War veteran who still practiced law part-time, mostly helping other vets with claims and benefits. Frank answered on the third ring. "Marcus, that you?" "Yeah. Frank, I need to ask you something hypothetical." "Hypothetical?" Frank chuckled. "In my experience, hypothetical always means real, but you don't want to admit it yet." Marcus smiled despite himself. "Fair enough. Hypothetical. If someone came into possession of bearer bonds from the 1970s, legal bonds that had matured, could they cash them without a lot of questions?" Silence on the other end. Then Frank said carefully, "How many bonds we talking about?" "Hypothetically, 5. Face value around 500,000 total." Frank whistled low. "And where would these hypothetical bonds have come from?" "Inheritance. Old family member died, left some things behind." "Uh-huh. And this family member acquired them legally?" "As far as anyone knows." Another pause. "Marcus, I'm going to pretend I believe that. Bearer bonds are legal to own and cash. The institution that issued them is required to honor them, but anything over 10,000 in a single transaction triggers reporting requirements. The bank files a currency transaction report with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." "So it gets reported." "Gets reported, yeah, but reported doesn't mean investigated. Thousands of CTRs get filed every day. As long as the bonds are legitimate and you're not structuring transactions to avoid reporting, you're not breaking any laws." Marcus's mind raced. Structuring? Breaking up large transactions into smaller ones to stay under the 10,000 threshold. That's illegal, but cashing legitimate bonds at their full value and paying taxes on them, that's just good luck and proper estate planning. "And if someone had more than 5 bonds?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Hypothetically." "Hypothetically. Then that someone would need a good estate attorney, a trustworthy financial advisor, and probably a tax specialist. They'd want to set up proper structures, trusts, maybe offshore accounts for asset protection. Do everything by the book so nothing looks suspicious." "And you could help with that?" "Hypothetically? Yeah, I could help with that. For a friend who served his country and got a raw deal from the VA, I could definitely help with that." Marcus closed his eyes. "I'll call you next week." "Marcus," Frank's voice was serious now, "whatever you've got going on, be smart about it. The government doesn't like surprises, especially expensive ones." "I will. Thanks, Frank." He hung up and stared at the bonds. Frank had basically just given him a roadmap. Cash them legally, pay the taxes, set up proper structures. Do everything above board. Just don't volunteer information about where they came from. The next morning, Marcus drove to Helena, found a safety deposit box at a bank he'd never used before, used his real name and ID, paid for a year up front in cash. He put the bonds, the gold, and the diamonds inside, kept 1 gold bar with him. Then he went looking for a precious metals dealer. He found one in a strip mall, tucked between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. The sign said, "Mountain States Gold and Silver we buy and sell." Marcus walked in trying to look casual. The guy behind the counter was maybe 30, wearing a polo shirt with the store logo. "Help you?" "I have a gold bar I'd like to sell." Marcus pulled it from his jacket. The guy's eyes widened. He reached for it, then stopped. "May I?" Marcus handed it over. The guy examined it carefully, checked the stamp, weighed it on a digital scale. "This is legitimate. Treasury bar, 1964. Where'd you get it?" "My uncle passed. Found it in his stuff." The guy nodded like he'd heard that story before. "Happens more than you'd think. Older generation, they didn't trust banks. Kept gold under the mattress." He did some calculations on a calculator. 15.2 ounces at current spot price minus my commission, I can give you 27,500. Marcus's throat was dry. "Cash?" Anything over 10,000 I have to file paperwork, but yeah, I can do cash if you prefer. Just need your ID and signature. Marcus hesitated. This was it. The moment where he either walked away and pretended none of this happened, or committed fully to a path that could change everything or destroy him. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. 30 minutes later, Marcus walked out with $27,500 in $100 bills, rubber-banded and in a manila envelope. His hands shook so badly he could barely unlock Jim's truck. He'd just sold stolen gold and nobody had arrested him, which meant it could work. All of it could work. That night, Marcus sat in his trailer counting money. $27,500. More than 2 years' worth of VA checks. Enough to fix his truck, pay off his debts, and still have enough left over for 6 months of living expenses, but he didn't spend it on himself. Instead, he drove to the other side of Copper Ridge, to the trailer park where Tyler lived. Tyler Mitchell, 24 years old, Army infantry, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came back with a Purple Heart and PTSD so bad he couldn't hold down a job or sleep through the night without waking up screaming. Marcus had met him at the VA 6 months ago, both of them waiting for therapy appointments that kept getting rescheduled. They'd gotten to talking. Tyler reminded Marcus of himself at that age, angry and scared and trying to hide it behind bravado. Tyler's trailer was dark. Marcus knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Finally, the door cracked open. Tyler stood there in sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Marcus, what are you doing here? Can I come in?" Tyler stepped aside. The trailer was a mess, empty food containers, beer cans, clothes piled everywhere. It smelled like depression and desperation. "Tyler, I need to ask you something. If you had money, enough money to get stable, what would you do with it?" Tyler laughed bitterly. "Man, I don't know. Get a real place, I guess. Get my meds regulated. Maybe take some classes. Try to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with my life." "How much would that take?" "I don't know. 10, 15,000? Might as well be $1 million for all the good it does me." Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket. Inside was $15,000 in cash. He set it on Tyler's grimy coffee table. Tyler stared at it. "What is this?" "It's a chance. Take it." "Marcus, I can't. Where did you even get this?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is you use it right. Get stable. Get help. Don't drink it away or waste it. Promise me." Tyler's eyes filled with tears. He looked at the money, then at Marcus, then back at the money. Why? "Because somebody should have done it for me 20 years ago. Because Robert should still be alive. Because we served and we deserve better than this." Marcus stood up. "I'll check on you next week. You use that money right, you hear me?" He left before Tyler could argue, before he could second-guess himself, before the weight of what he'd just done could drag him down. Driving back to his own trailer, Marcus realized something. The money didn't feel like theft anymore. It felt like justice. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus made 3 more trips to the bunker. Each time, he was more careful, parked in different locations, hiked in from different directions, varied the times he went, never took more than he could easily carry, never depleted any single container enough to be noticeable. He took 5 more bearer bonds, 3 more gold bars, a handful of rare coins, some platinum, total value, close to another $1 million. He distributed it carefully, cashed 1 gold bar at a time at different dealers in different cities, put the bonds in multiple safety deposit boxes at multiple banks, never did anything that would connect the dots, and he started helping people. Jim got an anonymous envelope with $5,000 and a note that said for the prosthetic. Maria found $10,000 taped to her windshield with instructions to use it for gas money to therapy. He paid off Robert's widow's mortgage anonymously, $23,000 that let her keep the house. Marcus moved carefully, quietly. Nobody knew where the money came from. People assumed it was some kind of veterans charity or a generous donor. Marcus never corrected them. But Frank Morrison knew something was up. When Marcus called to set up a meeting, Frank's first words were, "How many bonds did you really find?" They met at a diner outside Helena, far from anyone who might know them. Marcus sat across from Frank in a corner booth and told him a version of the truth. "My uncle was a government contractor during the Cold War. He died, left me some things, bonds, gold, other assets, lot of assets." Frank stirred his coffee slowly. "How much are we talking?" "Enough that I need help managing it properly." "Marcus." Frank leaned forward. "I've been doing this a long time. I know when someone's telling me the whole story and when they're leaving parts out. I'm not asking what you found or where you found it, but I need to know if it's stolen." "It's not stolen from any person. It was abandoned, forgotten. And if I'd reported it, it would have disappeared into government bureaucracy, and nobody who actually needs it would ever see a dime." Frank studied him for a long moment. "You're using it to help veterans?" "Yeah." "How much have you moved so far?" "About 40,000. Small amounts spread out, nothing that raises flags." Frank nodded slowly. "And you want to scale up?" "I want to do it right. Legal, clean, protected. I want to set up a foundation or trust or whatever it takes to help veterans who are falling through the cracks. Housing, medical care, education, whatever they need." "That's ambitious." "Frank, there are guys out there dying because they can't afford insulin or a warm place to sleep. I have the means to fix that. I just need to know how to do it without ending up in federal prison." Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled out a notebook. "Okay, here's what we do. What happens next will test everything Marcus believed about duty, honor, and what he's owed. Will he walk away, report it, or take what a nation forgot to give him? Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." Over the next month, Frank helped Marcus set up the framework. They created a private trust with Marcus as the sole trustee, opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands for asset protection, completely legal as long as they were properly reported, set up a network of LLCs to receive and distribute funds, hired a tax attorney who asked no questions but made sure everything was documented correctly. Marcus liquidated another 200,000 in assets. Gold mostly, easier to move than bonds. He paid taxes on every dollar, claimed it as inheritance proceeds, filed all the required paperwork. The government got its cut. Nobody questioned where the gold came from originally. And then he started building. He purchased a small apartment building in Copper Ridge, 8 units, paid cash through one of the LLCs, renamed it Sanctuary Housing, offered it rent-free to homeless veterans. Tyler was the first tenant. Then came 3 others, guys Marcus knew from the VA, guys who'd been living in cars or shelters or nowhere at all. He hired a part-time case manager, a social worker named Diane who'd worked with veterans for 20 years. She helped residents navigate benefits, schedule medical appointments, find employment. Marcus paid her salary from the trust. Word spread quietly through the veteran community. The apartment in Copper Ridge that asked no questions and turned nobody away. Marcus kept it low-key, no press, no publicity, just a safe place for people who'd served and been forgotten. But it wasn't enough. Every night, Marcus thought about that vault, about $500 million sitting in the dark while veterans killed themselves at a rate of 22 per day. The math haunted him. One evening, he was at Sanctuary Housing helping Tyler move furniture when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this Marcus Reed?" "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Sarah Delgado. I'm a special agent with the Treasury Department. I'd like to ask you some questions about bearer bond redemptions in Montana." Marcus's blood went cold. He stepped outside into the parking lot, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm sorry, what?" "We've noticed an unusual pattern of bearer bond redemptions across several states. Old bonds, Cold War era, being cashed in various locations. Your name has appeared in connection with some of these transactions. I inherited some bonds from my uncle. I've been cashing them legally, paying taxes, doing everything by the book. I'm sure you have, Mr. Reed. That's not what concerns us. What concerns us is the volume and the vintage. These particular bonds were issued through a program that was supposed to have been completely liquidated in the 1980s. We're trying to track down where they came from originally. Marcus's mind raced. My uncle was a government contractor, that's all I know. What was your uncle's name? Bernard Whitaker. Marcus pulled the name from thin air, remembered seeing it on old documents in the bunker. He died 2 years ago. And he left you these bonds in his estate? That's right. Do you have documentation, a will, probate records? It was informal. He didn't have much, just some personal effects and these bonds. I didn't think I needed to probate anything. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Mr. Reed, I'd like to meet with you in person. Just a conversation, nothing formal. Can you come to Helena tomorrow? Am I being investigated? You're a person of interest in a historical asset inquiry, that's all. If your story checks out, this goes away. If it doesn't, we have problems. Marcus closed his eyes. I'll be there. He hung up and stood in the parking lot, shaking. This was it. The moment he'd known would come eventually. The moment where everything either held together or collapsed. He called Frank. We have a problem. They met that night at Frank's office. Marcus explained about Sarah Delgado and the Treasury Department. Frank listened, taking notes, his expression grave. Okay, Frank said finally. Here's what we do. We cooperate fully. You go to the meeting, you answer questions honestly where you can. You don't volunteer information. If she asks about the uncle, we produce documentation. What documentation? I made him up. I know a guy who does estate paperwork. He can backdate some documents, create a paper trail. It's not exactly legal, but it's not exactly illegal either. Gray area. Frank, I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking, I'm offering. Marcus, what you're doing with that housing project, that matters. Those guys have nobody else. If the government finds that vault and takes everything back, it'll sit in some warehouse forever while veterans keep dying. I'd rather see you use it than let it rot. Marcus looked at the old lawyer, this man who'd served his country 60 years ago and still fought for his fellow veterans every day. Why are you helping me? Frank smiled sadly. Because when I came back from Korea, I was homeless for 2 years, lived on the streets of San Francisco, couldn't hold a job, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. A man named Charlie took me in. Charlie was a World War II vet, ran a boarding house, let me stay for free until I got on my feet. He saved my life. Frank's eyes were distant. Charlie died in 1968, never asked for anything in return, never wanted recognition, just helped because he could, because we take care of our own. He looked at Marcus. You're doing what Charlie did for me. I'm just making sure you can keep doing it. The next day, Marcus sat in a conference room at the Federal Building in Helena. Sarah Delgado sat across from him, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, professional. She had a file folder in front of her and a recording device on the table. Thank you for coming, Mr. Reed. As I said on the phone, this is just a conversation. You're not under arrest or suspicion of any crime. Then why am I here? Because bearer bonds worth potentially millions of dollars are appearing in circulation, and they shouldn't exist. The program that issued them was sealed in 1983. All outstanding bonds were supposed to be recalled and destroyed. Marcus kept his face neutral. I don't know anything about programs. I just know my uncle left me some bonds and I've been cashing them. Sarah opened the folder. Tell me about Bernard Whitaker. He was my uncle on my mother's side. Worked for the government during the Cold War, something with logistics. He died in 2022, left me some personal effects. And these effects included bearer bonds? Yes, he had them in a safe deposit box. He told my mother years ago that they were his retirement insurance in case Social Security wasn't enough. Sarah made notes. Did he say where he got them? No. I assumed they were part of his compensation or something he'd purchased. Mr. Reed, do you understand what these bonds represent? They were part of a classified continuity of government program. Possessing them raises national security questions. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. I'm a veteran. I have a secret clearance from my service. I'm not trying to compromise anything. I'm just trying to survive on a VA check that doesn't cover rent. Something shifted in Sarah's expression. You're a veteran. Gulf War, demolitions, medically retired in 2004. She glanced at her notes. You're currently running a housing project for homeless veterans. Yes, sanctuary housing in Copper Ridge, 8 units, non-profit. Funded by these bonds? Funded by legal liquidation of inherited assets. I pay taxes on every dollar. Sarah sat back. Mr. Reed, I need you to understand something. If these bonds came from where I think they came from, you're in possession of stolen government property. That's a federal crime. Even if the government forgot it existed? Especially if the government forgot it existed. They stared at each other across the table. Marcus made a choice. Agent Delgado, can I ask you something off the record? She hesitated, then nodded. How many veterans do you think killed themselves this week? She blinked. I don't know. 22. 22 per day. That's 154 this week. That's 8,000 a year. Guys who served their country and came home broken and got abandoned by the system. I'm one of them. I tried to die in 2015. Took all my pills at once. Jim from the trailer park found me and called 911. They pumped my stomach and sent me home with a bill I still can't pay. Sarah's expression softened. So yeah, maybe I found something I wasn't supposed to find. And maybe I'm using it in ways the government wouldn't approve. But I'm using it to save lives. Actual lives. Guys who would be dead right now if not for a warm place to sleep and someone who gives a damn. Marcus leaned forward. You want to arrest me, go ahead. But ask yourself if that money does more good in some warehouse or keeping Tyler Mitchell from eating a bullet. The room was silent. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then closed her folder. This conversation never happened. I'm going to write in my report that the bonds appear to be legitimate inheritance assets, properly taxed and documented. The trail ends with Bernard Whitaker, and nobody needs to look further. Marcus's breath caught. Why? Sarah stood up. Because my brother came back from Iraq in 2007 and hung himself in 2010, and nobody from the government showed up to help him either. She walked to the door, then stopped. Whatever you're doing, do it carefully. Don't make me regret this. Then she was gone. Marcus sat alone in the conference room, hands shaking, realizing he'd just gotten the rarest thing a veteran could hope for. Someone in the system who understood, who looked the other way, who let justice happen even when it wasn't legal. He drove back to Copper Ridge in a daze. That night, he stood outside sanctuary housing watching lights come on in the apartments. Tyler was in Unit 3, probably making dinner. Jim was in Unit 5. A new guy named Carlos, just arrived from Denver, homeless and desperate, was moving into Unit 7. 8 lives changed. 8 men with roofs over their heads and hope for tomorrow, and Marcus had access to 500 million more. The weight of it pressed down on him. Not the money itself, but the responsibility. The knowledge that he held the power to save hundreds, thousands of lives, and the knowledge that using that power meant living with the secret forever. He thought about Sarah Delgado, walking away, choosing mercy over law. He thought about Frank, helping him navigate the system. About Tyler's gratitude, about Robert's widow keeping her house. And he thought about all the veterans he hadn't saved yet, all the ones still struggling, still suffering, still forgotten. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Frank. We need to expand. I want to open facilities in every state. I want to do this right, big enough to actually make a difference. Frank was quiet for a moment. That's going to take a lot of money. I know, and I have it. Marcus, the more you move, the more risk you take. I know that too. But what's the point of surviving if we don't do anything worth surviving for? Frank laughed softly. Okay then, let's get to work. That night, Marcus returned to his trailer and pulled out the notebook where he'd been keeping records. He wrote a single line at the top of a new page, Project Sanctuary, making sure nobody gets forgotten again. Then he started planning how to change the world with a fortune that wasn't his, but wasn't anyone else's either. Just money that had been waiting in the dark for someone brave enough to use it. And Marcus Reed, forgotten veteran, demolitions expert, survivor, had finally found his mission. The months that followed Sarah Delgado's mercy were the busiest of Marcus's life. He moved through Copper Ridge like a man possessed, quiet and deliberate, but always moving. Sanctuary housing filled to capacity within 3 weeks. 8 veterans living rent-free, getting case management from Diane, slowly rebuilding their lives. But Marcus couldn't stop seeing the faces of the ones he hadn't reached yet. He made trips to the bunker twice a week now, always careful, always varying his route and timing. He'd converted the routine into a science. Arrive before dawn, spend 2 hours inside documenting and collecting, leave before the sun climbed too high. Never take more than 50 pounds of assets at a time. Never deplete any container by more than 10%. He filled his trailer with safety deposit boxes worth of bearer bonds, gold bars wrapped in towels and hidden in his closet, diamonds in old tobacco tins buried in his yard. It terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. Frank had connected him with a financial advisor named Patricia Chen, a 60-year-old Chinese-American woman who'd spent 30 years managing assets for wealthy clients. When Frank explained the situation in vague terms, Patricia had simply nodded and said, "I've seen stranger things. Let's keep you out of prison." They met weekly at her office in Helena, a modest suite above a dental practice. Patricia taught Marcus about diversification, risk management, tax optimization. She helped him set up a complex web of trusts and LLCs that were completely legal but made the money flow difficult to trace. The key, she explained one afternoon, spreading documents across her desk, is to never do anything that looks like you're hiding. You report everything, pay every tax, file every form, but you structure it so that casual observation doesn't reveal the full picture. Marcus studied the charts she'd drawn. How much can I move per month without raising flags? Conservatively, 200,000? That's enough to fund significant operations while staying below the threshold where people ask hard questions. And if I wanted to move more? Patricia looked at him over her glasses. Then we'd need to get creative. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency conversion, real estate purchases, but each step increases risk. I want to open facilities in other cities, Boise, Spokane, maybe Seattle, places where veteran homelessness is worst. That's ambitious. Frank said the same thing. Patricia smiled. Frank's a good man. If he trusts you, I trust you. But Marcus, you need to understand something. The more successful you become, the more attention you'll draw. Success is its own kind of danger. Her words proved prophetic. By August, Marcus had opened a second sanctuary housing location in Boise, Idaho, 12 units in a converted motel, then a third in Missoula, 8 units in a renovated apartment complex. Each facility had case managers, each operated under the same model. Safe housing, no questions asked, help with benefits and employment, path back to stability. The veteran grapevine was remarkably efficient. Word spread through VA waiting rooms and homeless encampments and online forums. The place in Montana that actually helps. The guy who doesn't make you jump through hoops. Sanctuary. Marcus hired more staff, social workers, nurses, job counselors. He purchased 2 vans to transport veterans to medical appointments. He established partnerships with local employers willing to hire vets with gaps in their resumes or criminal records from PTSD-related incidents. The operation was costing him $40,000 a month to run, He was liquidating assets as fast as Patricia would allow, converting gold and bonds into operating capital, paying taxes on everything, building a legitimate paper trail. And slowly, he was making a difference. Tyler got his first real job in 5 years, working maintenance at a school. Jim got his prosthetic properly fitted and started walking without pain for the first time since Iraq. Carlos enrolled in community college using his Guy Bill benefits that Diane had helped him access. But success brought scrutiny. In September, a reporter from the Montana Gazette showed up at Sanctuary Housing. Young guy, maybe 28, with a notebook and aggressive curiosity. "I'm doing a story on veteran homelessness," he said when Marcus met him outside. "I heard about what you're doing here. Pretty impressive for a non-profit that didn't exist 6 months ago." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "We're just trying to help." "Where's the funding come from?" "I checked. Sanctuary Housing isn't registered with any major foundations. No corporate sponsors I can find. No government grants. Private donations." "From who?" "Donors who prefer to remain anonymous." The reporter's eyes narrowed. "That's convenient. You understand how that looks, right? Mysterious funding, rapid expansion, no transparency. People might wonder if something illegal is going on." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "You're welcome to examine our tax filings. Everything we do is completely legal. We pay taxes, file proper documentation, operate above board." "I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm saying it's unusual, and unusual makes for good stories." "Here's a story for you," Marcus said quietly. 22 veterans kill themselves every day in this country. Most of them are homeless or struggling with PTSD. The VA is underfunded and overwhelmed. People fall through the cracks. We're trying to catch them before they hit bottom. That's the story. The reporter softened slightly. "Are you a veteran?" "Gulf War." "Is that why you're doing this?" Marcus thought about Danny, about Robert frozen in his truck, about the night he'd swallowed all his pills. "Yeah, that's why." The article ran 2 weeks later. It was mostly positive, highlighting the work Sanctuary Housing was doing, featuring interviews with Tyler and Carlos. But it included questions about funding that Marcus couldn't fully answer. "Where does the money come from?" repeated 3 times in the piece. Frank called him the day it published. "We might have a problem." They met at their usual diner. Frank slid a copy of the paper across the table. "This kind of attention, it's good and bad. Good because it validates what you're doing. Bad because now people are looking. What do people see when they look? A veteran with a VA disability check running a multi-state non-profit that's spending 6 figures a month. The math doesn't add up, Marcus. Smart people are going to start asking how." Marcus pushed his coffee away. "What do we do?" "We give them an answer that satisfies curiosity without revealing truth. I've been thinking about this. We need a benefactor, someone with deep pockets who wants to remain anonymous. We create documentation showing they donated a substantial sum to establish the foundation. A fake donor. A private donor whose identity is protected by attorney-client privilege. It's not uncommon. Wealthy people donate anonymously all the time." "Won't people try to find out who?" Frank smiled. "Let them try. I'll invoke privilege. Patricia will confirm the funds came through proper channels. The paper trail is clean. Unless someone has probable cause for a warrant, which they don't, the identity stays protected." Marcus nodded slowly. It made sense, but each layer of deception made him feel heavier. That night, he drove out to the bunker. He needed to see it again, needed to remember why he'd started this. The entrance was exactly as he'd left it. Marcus descended into the familiar amber glow and walked to Vault B. Entered the code, pulled open the door, stood among the containers. He'd taken maybe 3% of what was here, barely made a dent. The manifest showed 295 million. He'd moved maybe 8 million total. 287 million still sat in the darkness. Enough to house every homeless veteran in Montana, Enough to fund PTSD treatment for thousands. Enough to change the system, but only if he didn't get caught. Marcus opened container Alpha 15 and pulled out a stack of bills, 50s, banded by the Federal Reserve. He counted out $10,000 and put it in his jacket. Then he closed the container, sealed the vault, and climbed back into the cold night air. The money in his pocket felt like a promise, or maybe a threat. Back in Copper Ridge, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the reporter's questions, about Frank's warnings, about how far he'd come and how far he could fall. At 3 a.m, his phone rang. Tyler. "Marcus, you need to come to Sanctuary. Something's wrong with Jim." Marcus dressed in 30 seconds and drove across town, found Tyler standing outside Unit 5, pale and shaking. Inside, Jim was on the floor, unconscious, breathing shallow. Empty pill bottles on the coffee table. "I heard him fall," Tyler said. "I thought he was drunk, but then I saw the bottles." Marcus checked Jim's pulse. Weak, but there. He called 911, then sat with Jim's head in his lap, talking to him, keeping him conscious until the ambulance arrived. At the hospital, the doctor was blunt. He took enough painkillers to kill someone twice his size. If your friend hadn't found him when he did, he'd be dead. Jim survived, spent 3 days in the hospital, then transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. When Marcus visited, Jim couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry," Jim whispered. The pain was so bad and the VA kept denying my requests for better medication, and I just wanted it to stop." Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed. "Jim, why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what? That I'm broken? That I can't hack it? You're trying to save people, Marcus. I didn't want to be another failure on your watch." The words hit like a punch. Marcus realized he'd been so focused on expanding, on helping more people, that he'd missed the crisis happening right in front of him. "You're not a failure," Marcus said quietly. "The system failed you. I failed you. I should have seen this coming. You can't save everyone." "Maybe not, but I can damn well try." That conversation changed something in Marcus. He realized he'd been treating sanctuary housing like a logistics problem, moving money and resources and checking boxes. But the men living there weren't problems to be solved. They were people carrying trauma that didn't have easy solutions. He called a meeting with all his case managers. Diane drove up from Copper Ridge, the others video called from Boise and Missoula. Marcus laid it out plainly. "We're not doing enough. We're giving people roofs and food, but we're not addressing the core issues. PTSD, depression, addiction, chronic pain. We need real mental health support." Diane nodded. "I've been saying this. We need therapists on staff, not just case managers. We need psychiatric care, pain management specialists. But that's expensive." "How expensive?" "To do it right, another $20,000 a month per facility, minimum." Marcus did the math. 3 facilities, $60,000 a month, $720,000 a year. "Do it," he said. Diane blinked. "Marcus, where are we going to get that kind of money?" "I'll find it. You just hire the best people you can." After the call ended, Patricia sent him a message. "We need to talk. Urgent." They met the next morning. Patricia looked worried, which was unusual. She was normally unflappable. "We have a problem," she said, pulling out a folder. "The IRS is asking questions." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "You've reported significant income over the last 6 months. Inheritance proceeds, sale of precious metals, bond redemptions. They're asking for documentation of the original inheritance. Proof that Bernard Whitaker was a real person who left you these assets. Frank created documentation. Backdated documents won't hold up to serious scrutiny. If they push hard, they'll find inconsistencies. Dates that don't match, paperwork filed after the fact, a trail that looks manufactured because it was. What do they want? An audit. They want to verify the source of your funds and make sure you've paid appropriate taxes." Marcus's hands were shaking. Can we fight this? We can delay it, make them work for it, but eventually they'll get what they want, and when they do, they'll find problems. So what do I do? Patricia was quiet for a moment. You have two choices. You can cooperate with the audit and hope the documentation holds up. Or you can disappear the money, shut down the operations, walk away before they dig deeper. I'm not walking away. Then we fight. But Marcus, you need to understand. If they discover the truth, if they trace this back to that bunker, you're looking at federal charges, theft of government property, fraud, conspiracy. You could spend the rest of your life in prison. Marcus stared at her. And if I do nothing, 22 veterans will kill themselves today, and 22 more tomorrow, and the day after that. That's not your responsibility. It is now. He left Patricia's office and drove without destination, just moving, trying to think. He ended up at the cemetery where Robert was buried, stood by the headstone in the cold October wind. I don't know what to do, Marcus said to the stone. I'm trying to help people, but I'm in way over my head. Every time I fix one problem, 3 more show up. The stone offered no answers. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Tyler. Can you come back to Sanctuary? Someone here to see you. He drove back to Copper Ridge, found a man in his 50s waiting outside the main office, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Former military bearing, obvious even in civilian clothes. Marcus Reed? That's me. The man extended his hand. Tom Sullivan, Army, 82nd Airborne, retired. I heard about what you're doing here. Drove up from Wyoming to see for myself. They shook hands. Tom had a grip like steel. Come on in, Marcus said. Over coffee in the cramped office, Tom explained his story. 2 tours in Iraq, medically retired in 2008, struggled with PTSD and unemployment for years. Finally got stable, got a job managing a warehouse, but never forgot what it was like. I've got some money saved, Tom said. Not a fortune, but enough. I want to help. I want to do what you're doing, but in Wyoming, Cheyenne, Casper, places where guys are falling through the cracks. Marcus studied him. Why? Because 3 months ago, my buddy Derek blew his brains out in his garage. We served together. I thought he was doing okay. Found out after he died that he'd been denied disability 4 times, was about to lose his house, couldn't afford his meds. Tom's voice cracked. I should have seen it, should have helped. I'm sorry. I don't want sorry. I want to do something. Teach me how. Marcus felt something shift, an idea forming. What if it wasn't just you in Wyoming? What if we built a network, veterans helping veterans across the whole region? Tom leaned forward. I'm listening. I provide the funding and framework. You run operations in Wyoming. We find other veterans in other states who want to do the same thing. Each person runs their local operation, but we share resources, knowledge, support. How much funding are we talking about? Enough to make a real difference. Housing, medical care, case management, everything we do here. Where's this money coming from? Marcus chose his words carefully. A private donor who wants to see systemic change. Someone who got tired of watching veterans die while the government shuffles paperwork. Tom studied him for a long moment. This donor have a name? No. Does this donor know you personally? Very well. Tom smiled slowly. Okay then, I'm in. Over the next month, Marcus expanded the network. Tom launched Sanctuary Wyoming in Cheyenne. A former Navy corpsman named Lisa started Sanctuary Washington in Spokane. A retired Marine named David opened Sanctuary Oregon in Portland. Each location operated independently but followed the same model. Safe housing, comprehensive support, no judgment, no bureaucracy. Just help. Marcus was now funding 5 facilities across 4 states. His monthly operating costs had climbed to $130,000. He was liquidating assets faster than Patricia liked, converting gold and bonds as quickly as they could process them. But it was working. They were housing 47 veterans. They'd prevented 3 suicides that Marcus knew about, probably more he didn't. They'd helped 12 people get jobs, 23 were in therapy, 7 were back in school. The numbers weren't just statistics to Marcus. They were faces, names, stories. But the pressure was mounting. The IRS audit progressed slowly but relentlessly. Patricia was running interference, providing documentation, delaying where she could, but she warned Marcus they were running out of time. Frank called one night with more bad news. There's been chatter. Someone contacted the Treasury Department asking about the original Bernardino Whitaker bond program. They're trying to connect dots. Who? I don't know, but it's making people nervous. Marcus stood in his trailer, looking at the stack of correspondence from the IRS, thinking about the bunker, about the $280 million still sitting there, about how easily this could all fall apart. His phone rang. Diane. Marcus, you need to come to Sanctuary. Now. It's urgent. He found 3 people waiting in the parking lot. Veterans he didn't recognize, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "You saved my brother's life." A woman stepped forward, maybe 40, tears streaming down her face. Are you Marcus? Yeah. My brother Kevin was living on the streets in Spokane. He came to your facility there 3 weeks ago. They gave him a place to stay, got him into treatment, helped him apply for benefits. She was crying now. I hadn't heard from him in 2 years. I thought he was dead. Lisa called me yesterday and said he wanted to talk. I drove 8 hours to meet him. The other 2 people stepped forward, a man and woman, maybe in their 60s. Our son, the man said. Tyler Mitchell. You know him? Marcus nodded. Tyler lives here. He's doing really well. The woman grabbed Marcus's hands. We'd lost him. He wouldn't return our calls, wouldn't let us help. We didn't know how to reach him. But then he called last week and said he was in a program and he was getting better and he wanted us to visit. Tears ran down her face. You gave us our son back. Marcus didn't know what to say. He stood there while these strangers hugged him and thanked him and told him stories about the people he'd helped. Later, after they'd left, Tyler found him sitting alone in the office. You okay? Tyler asked. I don't know, Marcus said honestly. I'm just trying to do the right thing, but it's getting complicated. Tyler sat down. Marcus, before this place, I was planning to kill myself. I had the gun loaded. I'd written the note. I was going to do it the next morning. He paused. Then Diane called, said there was a bed available here if I wanted it. No questions, no hassle, just a chance. I took it because I figured what did I have to lose, and now I'm not dead. I have a job. I'm talking to my parents again. I'm actually thinking about the future. He looked at Marcus directly. Whatever you're doing, whatever it costs you, it's worth it. You're saving lives. Don't forget that when things get hard. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. Thanks, Tyler. That night, Marcus drove out to the bunker one last time before winter made the roads impassable. He stood in Vault B, surrounded by containers of forgotten fortune, and made a decision. He wasn't going to stop. Not for the IRS, not for the Treasury Department, not for anyone. He'd found his purpose. This was his mission. If he went to prison, at least he'd go knowing he'd made a difference. He loaded his pack with bearer bonds and gold, more than he'd taken before, enough to fund operations through the winter and into spring. Enough to expand to 2 more states if Tom could find the right people to run them. As he climbed back into the cold night, Marcus thought about Sarah Delgado, the agent who'd looked the other way. He wondered if she'd known then what he was really doing, if she'd suspected the scale of what he'd found. Maybe she had. Maybe that's why she'd let him go. Driving back to Copper Ridge, Marcus made plans. He'd cooperate with the IRS audit, let Patricia and Frank handle the details, keep his head down. And he'd keep building, keep helping, keep fighting for the people the system had forgotten. Because in the end, what else could he do? Walk away and let the money sit in the dark while people died? Not a chance. He'd seen too much, helped too many. There was no going back now. The only path was forward, even if it led straight into a federal courtroom. Marcus Reed had spent his whole life following orders. Now he was giving them. And the order was simple: save everyone you can, whatever the cost. Winter hit Montana hard that year. By November, snow had buried Copper Ridge under 3 feet of white, and the roads to the bunker became impassable. Marcus found himself trapped by weather and circumstance, unable to access the vault, but also unable to escape the momentum he'd built. The IRS audit intensified. They wanted documentation for every bond redeemed, every gold bar sold, every dollar that had flowed through his accounts. Patricia worked overtime creating responses, providing records, buying time. But both she and Frank knew they were fighting a losing battle. "They're going to find inconsistencies," Frank said one grey December afternoon in his office. "The Bernard Whitaker documentation, it's good but it's not perfect. Dates that don't quite align, a death certificate that looks slightly wrong, probate records that feel manufactured." Marcus stared out the window at falling snow. "How long do we have?" "Maybe until spring. They'll slow down over the holidays, pick it back up in January. By March or April, they'll want definitive answers." "And if we can't provide them?" Frank's expression was grim. "Then they'll start looking at criminal charges, fraud, tax evasion, possibly conspiracy if they think Patricia and I were complicit." "I won't let you go down for this." "Marcus, we're already down. The question is how hard we hit when we land." Sanctuary housing continued operating through the winter, but the stress was taking its toll. Marcus lost 20 pounds, stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night, spent his days managing the facilities and his nights researching legal precedents, looking for some way out that didn't involve prison or shutting everything down. Tyler noticed. Knocked on Marcus's trailer door one January evening with a bag of takeout Chinese food. "You look like hell," Tyler said, pushing past him into the small kitchen. "Thanks." "I'm serious. When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Tyler unpacked containers. "Sit down. We're eating." They sat across from each other at the tiny table. Marcus picked at his food while Tyler ate with purpose. "You want to talk about it?" Tyler asked. "Talk about what?" "Whatever's eating you. You've been different the last few months, distracted, worried." Marcus considered lying, then decided Tyler deserved better. "The money that funds all this, it's complicated. People are asking questions I can't answer." "Is it illegal?" "It's grey, very grey." Tyler nodded slowly. "Are you in trouble?" "Might be. What happens if you are? What happens to Sanctuary?" That was the question that kept Marcus awake at night. "I don't know. I've got 6 months of operating capital in reserve. After that, if I can't access more funds, we'd have to shut down or find alternative funding." "How many people are we helping now?" 63 across 5 facilities. "And if we shut down?" "They go back to the streets, back to the VA waitlists, back to whatever they were running from." Tyler set down his fork. "Then we can't let that happen. It might not be up to us." "Bullshit." Tyler's voice was hard. "You know what I learned in Afghanistan? Sometimes you're in an impossible situation and there's no good choice. You just pick the least terrible option and commit to it fully. No hesitation, no second guessing." Marcus looked at him. "What's the least terrible option here?" "Tell the truth. Not to the IRS, but to the people who matter. The veterans you're helping, the staff who work for you. Give them the real story and let them decide if they want to fight for this with you." "Tyler, I can't. If people know where the money came from, they become accomplices. Or they become witnesses to something bigger than money. Marcus, you found a fortune the government forgot about, and you used it to save lives. That's not a crime. That's justice." Marcus wanted to believe him, but the law didn't see it that way. In February, everything accelerated. Patricia called with an edge in her voice he'd never heard before. "The Treasury Department has formally requested all documentation related to the bearer bonds. Not just the IRS now, Treasury." What does that mean? It means someone high up is paying attention. Treasury doesn't get involved in routine tax audits. They're investigating the bonds themselves, trying to figure out where they came from. Can we stonewall them? Not without looking guilty. We have to cooperate. 2 days later, Marcus got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Mr. Reed, this is Sarah Delgado. We need to talk." They met at the same Helena diner where he'd first met with Frank, neutral ground, public enough to feel safe. Sarah arrived in civilian clothes, no badge visible, but Marcus could see the weight she carried. She slid into the booth across from him. "You've been busy. Trying to help people." "I know. I've been watching." She pulled out a folder, set it on the table between them. Sanctuary housing, 5 locations, 63 residents, annual operating budget of $1.6 million. Impressive for a foundation that didn't exist a year ago. Marcus said nothing. "The bearer bonds you've been cashing, they're from a classified program called Project Safeguard, established in 1963, decommissioned in 1983. All assets supposedly recalled and destroyed." She paused. "Except they weren't, were they?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Marcus," her voice was gentle, "I told you last time to be careful. I looked the other way because I understood what you were trying to do. But now Treasury is involved. My boss is involved. People who don't care about dead veterans or good intentions. They just see missing government assets. So what happens now?" "That depends on you. Where did you find them?" Marcus met her eyes. This was it. The moment where he either lied and hoped it held or told the truth and accepted the consequences. "In a bunker. Cold War installation. Forgotten. Sealed. I took shelter there during that big storm last winter. Found a vault full of emergency assets that were supposed to sustain the government after nuclear war. Except the war never came, and everyone forgot the vault existed." Sarah absorbed this. "You found a continuity of government cash." "Yeah. How much?" "The manifest said $295 million. I've taken maybe $8 or $9 million total." Sarah closed her eyes. "Jesus, Marcus. What was I supposed to do? Report it and watch it disappear into government warehouses while veterans died? I tried playing by the rules my whole life. The rules don't work." "So you decided to steal from the federal government?" "I decided to use abandoned assets for their intended purpose. That money was meant to save the country in a crisis. We're in a crisis. 22 veterans a day, Sarah. That's over 8,000 a year. More than died in Iraq and Afghanistan combined in the worst years of those wars. We're losing more people at home than we lost in combat." "I know the numbers." "Then you know I'm right." Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Where's the bunker?" Marcus hesitated. Telling her meant giving up his only leverage, his only source of funding, everything. But not telling her meant she'd keep investigating, probably find it anyway, and he'd lose her sympathy in the process. Off Highway 43, about 40 miles west of Copper Ridge, old monitoring station, ventilation shaft visible, but you'd drive past it if you weren't looking. Entrance is sealed with a blast door. Sarah made notes. "Can you show me?" "Why?" "Because I need to see it. I need to understand what we're dealing with before I decide what to do." "What you do? You mean report me?" "I mean decide whether this is theft or something else." They drove out together 3 days later, Sarah in an unmarked sedan following Marcus's truck. The roads were better now. February thaw had cleared some snow. Marcus led her to the site, showed her the entrance, opened the blast door with the sequence he'd memorized. They descended together into the amber-lit silence. Sarah moved through the bunker slowly, taking in the old equipment, the sleeping quarters, the dated technology. Marcus watched her process it, seeing the Cold War frozen in time. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "It's like a museum. Wait until you see the vault." He led her to the communication room, flipped the breaker, entered the code. The door opened and the lights came on in sequence. Sarah stood at the threshold of Vault B and stared. Row after row of containers, precise and organized, exactly as Marcus had described. She walked down the rows, opening containers at random. Cash, gold, bonds, exactly as the manifest indicated. She examined the documentation, cross-checked serial numbers, verified dates. "This is real," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "This is actually real." "Told you." Sarah turned to face him. "Do you understand what you've done? This is one of the largest classified asset caches ever established. It was written off as lost or destroyed decades ago. The fact that it still exists, fully intact, this is historically significant. This is national security significant. What about the veterans it could help? Is that significant?" Sarah's expression shifted. "Don't twist this. You're not Robin Hood. You stole government property. Abandoned property. Legally, there's no difference. Morally, there's all the difference in the world." They stood facing each other in the vault, surrounded by fortune and consequence. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I'm going to make a call. My supervisor needs to know about this. But before I do, I need to know something. If I report this, if the government reclaims these assets, what happens to sanctuary housing? We shut down within 6 months. 63 people lose their homes. Hundreds more never get the help they need. And if I don't report it? I keep doing what I'm doing, helping people the system abandoned." Sarah pulled out her phone. Marcus's heart sank. This was it, the end. But then Sarah did something unexpected. She pulled up a recording app and pressed record. "My name is Special Agent Sarah Delgado, Treasury Department. The date is February 18th, 2026. I'm at an undisclosed location with Marcus Reed, investigating the source of bearer bonds from Project Safeguard." She paused. "Mr. Reed has led me to a classified Cold War installation containing emergency continuity of government assets valued at approximately $295 million. These assets were believed destroyed, but have remained intact and undiscovered for over 40 years. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Reed has admitted to taking approximately $8 to $9 million in assets from this location over the past year. He has used these funds to establish Sanctuary Housing, a veteran support organization operating in 5 states, currently housing 63 homeless veterans and providing comprehensive support services." She stopped the recording. "This is my insurance and yours." Marcus blinked. "I don't understand." "I'm not reporting this to my supervisor, not yet, but I am documenting it. If something happens to me, if I get hit by a bus or whatever, this recording goes to my attorney with instructions to make it public." "Why would you do that?" Sarah's eyes were hard. "Because my brother died waiting for the VA to approve his disability claim. Because I've spent 10 years watching the government fail the people who served it. Because sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing." She looked around the vault. "This money was meant to save the country in an emergency. You're right about one thing. We're in an emergency, just a different kind than anyone expected." "So what happens now?" "Now we do this right. We legitimize what you've built so it can survive without you constantly feeding it stolen assets. We find legal funding sources, government grants, private donations, corporate sponsors. We turn Sanctuary Housing into something the system can't touch. How long will that take?" 6 months, maybe a year. But you're going to help me figure out how to do it." She held up the recording device. "And in exchange, I keep this quiet. The bunker stays sealed. The assets stay untouched. You don't take another dollar from here." "And the money I already took?" "That's complicated. Legally, you're guilty of theft. Practically, prosecuting you helps nobody and destroys a program that's actually working. So we're going to construct a narrative that makes this go away." "What narrative?" Sarah smiled. "That's what we're going to figure out." Over the next 3 months, Sarah worked with Marcus, Frank, and Patricia to build a defense. They crafted a story that was mostly true but strategically incomplete. Yes, Marcus had inherited assets from a deceased relative. Yes, some documentation was unclear due to the age of the estate, but everything had been properly reported, taxes paid, funds used for legitimate charitable purposes. The key was never mentioning the bunker, never acknowledging Project Safeguard, treating the bonds as ordinary inheritance assets that happened to be valuable. Meanwhile, Sarah used her position to quietly close the Treasury investigation. She filed a report indicating the bonds appeared legitimate, properly redeemed, no evidence of fraud or national security concerns. Her supervisor, satisfied that Treasury's interests were protected, moved on to other cases. The IRS audit continued, but without the urgency it had before. Patricia negotiated a settlement. Marcus paid an additional $50,000 in back taxes for improperly documented inheritance proceeds, and the case closed. By May, the immediate threat had passed, but Sarah wasn't done. She'd become invested in sanctuary housing, not just as a cover story, but as a mission. She started making calls, leveraging her government contacts, connecting Marcus with legitimate funding sources. She introduced him to a defense contractor looking to improve their veteran relations image. They donated $200,000. She connected him with a private foundation focused on veteran mental health. They committed to $150,000 annually for 3 years. She even got the VA interested, piloting a program where sanctuary housing would receive referrals and government per diem payments for each veteran housed. "You're turning me legitimate," Marcus said one afternoon in June. They were sitting outside sanctuary housing in Copper Ridge, watching Tyler and 2 other residents plant flowers in the front garden. "I'm making sure this survives," Sarah replied. "You can't keep running it on stolen money. Eventually you'd get caught or run out. This way, sanctuary becomes part of the system, harder to dismantle." "What about the bunker?" "What bunker?" Sarah smiled. "I've never heard of any bunker. There's still almost $300 million sitting there, and it can sit there forever as far as I'm concerned. Maybe someday someone else will find it. Maybe not. Either way, it's not your problem anymore." Marcus watched Tyler laughing with the others, his hands dirty with soil, his face lighter than Marcus had ever seen it. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yeah, you could have. You'd have just ended up in prison." Sarah stood. "I have to get back to Helena. But Marcus, I mean it. No more trips to the bunker. No more assets. You promise me." "I promise. Because if you break this promise, I can't protect you. The recording I made, that's leverage as long as you stay clean. But if you go back, if you take more, then we both go down." Marcus understood. This was mercy with conditions, and the conditions were fair. Sarah left, and Marcus sat alone for a while, thinking about the journey from that storm-filled night to this quiet afternoon, about how desperation had led to discovery, and discovery to purpose. His phone buzzed, text from Tom Sullivan in Wyoming. "Just housed our 50th resident. Couldn't have done this without you. Thank you." 50 in Wyoming, 63 in Marcus's facilities, numbers that didn't capture the full story. Each one was a life redirected, a suicide prevented, a family reunited. The math still haunted him. 8,000 veterans dying by suicide every year. Sanctuary housing was saving dozens. The scale was overwhelming, but dozens was infinitely more than 0. By August, sanctuary housing had expanded to 7 states. The combination of legitimate funding, government contracts, and private donations had made it sustainable. Marcus was no longer the sole funder, just the founder. He'd hired a proper executive director, a former Army colonel named Janet, who actually knew how to run a non-profit. She managed the staff, handled the fundraising, dealt with the bureaucracy. Marcus became chairman of the board, focusing on strategy and vision rather than daily operations. It was strange stepping back. For months, Marcus had been the center of everything. Now he was advisory, supportive, but not essential. One September afternoon, Janet called him into the Copper Ridge office. "We need to talk about succession planning." Succession? You're 63, Marcus. You've built something remarkable, but it can't be dependent on you forever. We need to formalize governance, create structures that outlive any one person. Marcus realized she was right. He'd been so focused on building that he hadn't thought about what happened when he was gone. They spent the next month creating a proper board of directors. Tom Sullivan joined. So did Diane, the original case manager, Lisa from Washington, Sarah Delgado, using her government experience to provide oversight, Frank Morrison as legal counsel. Together, they drafted bylaws, mission statements, financial policies. Sanctuary housing became a real institution with rules and accountability. In October, they held their first formal board meeting, 13 people sitting around a conference table in Helena, discussing budgets and expansion plans and impact metrics. Marcus looked around the table at these people who'd become his team, his family. They were veterans and advocates, people who understood the mission because they'd lived it. "Before we start," Marcus said, "I want to say something. A year and a half ago, I was sitting in my trailer wondering if life was worth living. I had nothing, no purpose, no future, no hope. Then circumstances gave me an opportunity and I took it. But I couldn't have built this alone. Every person at this table contributed. Every resident in our facilities contributes. This isn't my organization, it's ours." Sarah caught his eye and gave a small nod. She knew what he meant: the circumstances, the opportunity, the bunker, the secret they'd share forever. "So, as we move forward," Marcus continued, "I want us to remember why we're here, not for recognition or credit, but because there are people out there right now, this moment, who are where I was, desperate, forgotten, ready to give up. And we have the power to reach them before they make that final choice." The room was silent. Then Tom spoke. "How many people have we helped total, across all our facilities?" Janet checked her notes. "We've housed 147 individuals, provided services to over 300. We've documented 9 prevented suicides, though the real number is probably higher. We've helped 72 people get jobs, 41 reconnect with families, 18 go back to school." "And how many have we lost?" Marcus asked quietly. Janet's expression fell. 3, 1 to overdose, 1 to medical complications, 1 to suicide, despite our interventions. Marcus absorbed this. 3 out of 147, a 98% success rate by any measure. But those 3 names, those 3 failures, they weighed heavy. "We can't save everyone," Diane said softly, "but we can keep trying." By December, Sanctuary Housing was operating in 9 states with plans to expand to 12 by the following summer. They'd housed over 200 veterans total. Their annual budget had grown to $3.2 million, most of it from legitimate sources now. Marcus had finally paid off the IRS settlement. His personal finances were stable. He'd even moved out of the trailer into a modest house. Nothing fancy, just a real place with working heat and a spare bedroom where Evelyn, Tyler's niece, sometimes stayed when she visited her uncle. One cold evening, Marcus drove out to Highway 43. He parked and hiked to the bunker entrance. Snow had drifted over it again, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. He stood there for a long time, not going inside, just remembering. This place had saved his life during the storm, then saved it again by giving him purpose. Inside that vault, $287 million still sat in the darkness, enough to expand sanctuary housing to all 50 states, enough to help thousands more. But he'd made a promise, and more importantly, he'd built something that could survive without it. Marcus pulled out his phone and deleted the photos he'd taken of the vault. Deleted the coordinates he'd saved, erased every digital trace of the bunker's location. Then he took one last look at the entrance, turned around, and walked back to his truck. Some secrets were meant to stay buried, and some missions were bigger than any one person's ability to fund them. In March of 2027, Sanctuary Housing received formal recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They were designated as a preferred community provider, eligible for government referrals and funding support. At the ceremony in Washington, D.C., Marcus stood beside Janet as the VA secretary praised their innovative approach to veteran homelessness. Sanctuary Housing represents the best of American values, the secretary said. Veterans helping veterans, communities coming together, proving that when we commit to caring for those who served, remarkable things are possible. Marcus thought about the irony. The government praising a program built on assets the government had forgotten. But maybe that was fitting. Maybe the real crime wasn't that he'd taken the money. Maybe it was that the money had been left to rot while people suffered. After the ceremony, Sarah found him in the hallway. "Congratulations. You're officially respectable now." "Feels weird, I bet. But Marcus, you did it. You built something that's going to outlast both of us. That matters. Couldn't have done it without you looking the other way." Sarah's expression was serious. "I didn't look the other way. I looked directly at what you were doing and decided it was more important than the rules you broke. There's a difference. What if someone finds the bunker someday? Then that's their decision to make. But as far as any official record shows, Project Safeguard was completely liquidated in the 80s. There's nothing to find." Marcus understood. She'd buried the documentation, made sure the bunker would stay secret even if someone stumbled on it, protecting him, protecting the mission. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank me by keeping this going. Every life you save justifies what we did." By the fall of 2027, Sanctuary Housing was operating in 14 states. They'd helped over 400 veterans. The model had proven so successful that other organizations were copying it, creating their own veteran housing programs based on Sanctuary's approach. Marcus was asked to speak at conferences, write articles, consult with other non-profits. He did some of it, but mostly he stayed focused on the work itself. Visiting facilities, meeting residents, making sure the mission stayed true. One afternoon in October, he was at the Copper Ridge facility when a young man walked in, maybe 25, wearing an army jacket and carrying everything he owned in a backpack. "Is this Sanctuary Housing?" the young man asked. Diane smiled. "It is. Are you looking for help?" I'm Marcus. Wait, no, my name is Marcus too. He stopped, overwhelmed. "I heard you guys help veterans. I just got back from Syria. I'm not doing great. I tried the VA, but the wait list is like 6 months and I don't have anywhere to stay and Tears started falling. "I don't know what to do." Marcus stepped forward. "Hey, it's okay. You came to the right place. We've got a room available. Let's get you settled." The young Marcus looked at the older Marcus. "Just like that? No paperwork, no wait list? Just like that. Come on." As they walked to an available unit, Marcus thought about the symmetry. Another Marcus, another veteran, another person on the edge finding sanctuary. This was why he'd done it. All of it. The risk, the theft, the deception. For moments like this where someone desperate found hope instead of darkness. That night, after the young Marcus was settled with a warm meal and a safe bed, the older Marcus stood outside Sanctuary Housing looking at the lights in the windows. 12 windows lit, 12 men inside, each one a life that could have ended differently. His phone buzzed. Text from Tyler. "Dinner tomorrow? My treat. Finally got that promotion." Marcus smiled and replied, "Absolutely. Proud of you." The wind came down from the mountains, cold but not cruel. Winter was coming again, the cycle continuing. But Marcus wasn't afraid of winter anymore. He'd survived the storm that drove him to the bunker, survived the investigation that could have destroyed him, survived the weight of carrying a secret that would have crushed lesser people. And in surviving, he'd learned something profound. It wasn't the money that had saved him. It was the purpose, the mission, the knowledge that his life mattered because he'd chosen to make it matter. The 287 million still sat in that bunker, frozen in time, waiting for someone who would never come. Or maybe waiting for someone who would, decades from now, and they'd have to make the same impossible choice Marcus had made. But that wasn't his problem anymore. He'd taken what he needed, used it for something good, and walked away. That was enough. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. But Marcus had learned something more. Sometimes changing the world means breaking the rules that keep the world broken. Sometimes justice lives in the grey spaces where law and morality don't quite align. And sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is survive your own desperation long enough to help someone else survive theirs. As the first snow began to fall over Copper Ridge, Marcus Reed stood outside a building full of forgotten veterans who'd been found. And he realized he was no longer one of them. He wasn't forgotten anymore. He wasn't lost. He'd found his way home by building a home for others. Because in the end, sanctuary wasn't a place. It was a promise. A commitment that said no matter how dark things got, no matter how much the world had abandoned you, there was still someone who gave a damn. Someone who would show up. Someone who wouldn't walk away. Marcus had become that someone. And the fortress of fortune he'd discovered in the darkness had given him the power to keep that promise. The government could reclaim the bunker someday. They could audit his taxes forever. They could question his methods and debate his ethics. But they couldn't erase the lives he'd changed. Couldn't undo the suicides he'd prevented. Couldn't take back the hope he'd given to people who'd lost everything else. That was his legacy now. Not the money he'd stolen, but the lives he'd saved with it. And on cold Montana nights when the wind howled and the snow fell heavy, Marcus would think about that bunker sealed beneath stone and ice, about the fortune still waiting in the dark, and he'd smile, because he'd taken just enough to light a candle against the darkness. And that candle had become a flame, and that flame had become a fire, and that fire was still burning, warming the forgotten and illuminating a path forward for those who'd lost their way. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the forgotten still deserve to be found.